Otis Library, and today I will show you how to create a fancy first letter to add to your next story or comic, to a page in your journal or sketchbook, or as a doodle on any piece of paper. You may be wondering why we start some stories, sentences, paragraphs, and chapters with a fancy letter. Fancy first letters have a long history of showing us where to begin. These special characters have been in use since before the printing press and were illustrated by hand by special artists. In today's tutorial, we will create a decorated letter that features positive and negative space and some creative patterning. To begin, you will need some loose paper, a pencil, an eraser, a thick and a thin marker, or a pen, and a pair of scissors. You can pause the video while you gather your supplies. Step 1. Create a square. The first step in creating our fancy first letter is to create a small square out of paper. Watch while I first cut one large square from my piece of paper and then divide it into 4 smaller squares of the right size. To create the large square, first fold the left bottom corner of the paper up to the top edge of the paper so that the left side of the page is flush with the top edge of the paper and creates a triangle, like this. Crease the paper and cut off the remaining rectangle on the right-hand side. Unfold the triangle and lay it flat. Fold this square in half and in half again like this. Unfold your piece of paper and note the 4 small square quadrants that exist. Cut on your creases to divide the 4 squares. Excellent. We need one of these squares for our fancy first letter. Using a new piece of paper, either a loose paper or within a journal or notebook, trace your small square on the left-hand side of the page. Excellent. Step 2. Choose a letter and make it fancy. Our next step is to choose a letter in the alphabet. It could be the first letter of your first or last name, or the first letter of a sentence that you wrote, or of a phrase that you admire. I will use the letter L in the phrase, "Love your library." Next, write your letter in basic block letter style in the center of the small square. Begin by writing the letter in capital letters, and then draw a shape around the letter that follows the original lines but is wider than before, like this. Excellent. Leave some space around the letter on each side so that it is smaller than the overall size of the square. Next, our basic block letters can be made fancier. By adding points, curls, and other appendages to the sides and corners of our letter, we can make a letter that is more unique and creative. Watch as I add points and curls to my letter L. Excellent. Step 3. Divide the design. Our next task is to divide our design into 2 halves. We can do this by folding our small square in either a vertical horizontal, or diagonal direction. I will fold my square in a diagonal direction so that the opposite corners come together, like this. Next, I will align the 2 edges of the triangle with the sides of my square. And trace the fold I have created lightly. Excellent. Step 4. Create positive and negative space. Positive space in an image is the portion of the design that has primary importance, that grabs the interest of the viewer and stands out from the page. The negative space in an image is the area that exists around the positive space. Today we will transform half of our divided letter into a positive space and the remaining half into a negative space. As an example, I have colored the upper half of my fancy letter L to indicate that it is a positive space. In the lower half of my L, I have colored the space around the letter so that the remaining portion of the L becomes a negative space. Now that we know more about positive and negative spaces, let's explore some techniques for making the positive spaces of our fancy letters more ornate. Step 5. Design and add a creative pattern. A great way to add interest to our fancy letter is to design and add a densely packed creative pattern to our positive spaces. Design a pattern using dots, lines, or shapes. A densely packed pattern will have more contrast with our opposite negative spaces, while a loosely drawn pattern will have less contrast. It may be helpful to brainstorm at least 3 different styles of pattern and pick your favorite. Watch while I develop a pattern using dots, lines, and shapes. Excellent! I will now select my favorite pattern. I will select my shape pattern for my final fancy first letter. Using a thin marker or a pen, I will apply my pattern to one half of the letter, making it a positive space. I will apply my design to this half of my fancy L. Next, I will apply my pattern around this half of the fancy L. Step 6. Add a small border and complete your phrase. I have added a small border, which mirrors my design, along the edge of my square. I'm also ready to add the completion of my phrase, love your library. Finally, our fancy first letters are complete. I hope you enjoyed the tutorials in this Otis Library Doodle Toolkit series.